Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We'll be talking about the Canadian zero-emission vehicles market and our electric vehicle database that we've built. So quick introductions. My name is Gabriel Risbud-Vincent. I am a renewable energy analyst here at Solas Energy, and I'm joined by Paula, who is our co-founder and president.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Paula McGarrigle. So I've founded Solas 14 years ago. I think we're coming up to our 14th birthday. I've been in the industry for about 24 years. Myself and Evelyn Carpenter from the US both own Solas Energy. We've worked on about 78 gigawatts, probably closer to 80 gigawatts of renewable energy project and over 500 projects so far in the last 14 years. We have a lot of clients in many different sectors, but most of them are all interested in renewable energy, GHG emission reductions, innovation, emerging technology. So we're delighted to have worked with our clients for the last 14 years on essentially lower GHG solutions for whatever they're doing. And we've helped on everything from the full project's life cycle, from strategy development, feasibility studies, all the way through to construction management and project implementation. So I'll pass that back over to you, Gabe.
Thanks, Paula. So today we'll be going over electric vehicle market trends, the federal government's involvement in the electric vehicle industry, and then we'll touch on the database we've built, and we'll end the session with a Q&A session. So first off, some key terms that we need to know. So you'll see a lot of acronyms throughout this presentation that are very similar. So the trick to remember is that if you see EV preceded by a Z, so ZEV, it means zero emission vehicles. And any other letter before means electric vehicle. So zero emissions or electric. And so we have all these different kinds of vehicles. We have BEVs, battery electric, fuel cell electric vehicles, so hydrogen fuel cells generally. And then we have HEV for hybrid. And then if it's a hybrid, you can plug into a wall to recharge your battery. It's a plug-in hybrid, or PHEV. But anyway, we have all these different acronyms. We'll be going over each of them, and I'll be explaining them in more detail. But here's a list. You can take a picture if you want right now, just to have that for reference for later. All right.
So a lot of people ask me, well, how many EVs have been sold in Canada and how many are there today? So I thought, let's just show you how many there has been today. This first slide gives an idea of the battery electric vehicles that have been sold in Canada for the year of 2022. So within that year, there was 70,000, almost 71,000 vehicles sold that were battery electric vehicles. So that was 6.1% of all vehicles registered in that year. You can see on the top left graph, it's quite an increase since 2017 if you go from an annual basis. So I entered the EV market myself in 2020. So you can see there's been a heck of a lot since then. On the bottom left chart, you can see that most of it has been passenger vehicles, but only recently there's been multi-purpose vehicles that have been entering and also increasing in terms of sales. On the top right-hand chart, there's Ontario and Quebec and British Columbia, and they dominate the sales. Alberta information is not available in this format, but the Canada-wide ones do include that information. Quebec and British Columbia do have incentive programs for retailers to sell electric vehicles, and Ontario used to have one, and of course Ontario has a very large population, so on a percentage basis this may be relatively low, but Quebec and Ontario and BC always dominate on the EV sales for Canada. So this next one is HEV, so hybrid electric vehicles. This one, the growth on the top left-hand side, you can see it's definitely growing, not quite as steep as what the electric vehicles are. And the number one dominating vehicle is really your minivan. So here we have the multi-purpose minivan. Our multi-purpose vehicle is the number one sales. Again, 63,000 or almost 64,000 vehicles were registered in 2022. So that's 5.5% of all vehicles registered. So if you take just those two, you have 6.6 and 5.5, add those together, and that's just the electric vehicle for battery electric and HEV. So we'll go to the next one, and it's on plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So these ones are quite a bit lower. You can see it's only 1.7% of all vehicles registered, so almost 20,000 vehicles sold in 2022. The number one is a multi-purpose vehicle, and sales have been relatively flat. Again, we have Quebec dominating, followed by Ontario and then British Columbia. So if you add all those up, that's a significant slice of the traditional vehicles that are sold that have an electric vehicle aspect to them, either battery electric vehicle, hybrid electric vehicle, or plug-in hybrid electric vehicle.
Right, yeah. So we've now seen the trend that's been going on over the past couple of years. And so we'll get into how this market is evolving and how Canada is getting involved in that evolution. Once again, here are the historical sales on the left here in yellow. You can see that we're sort of approaching 10% for battery electric vehicles in the past few years. And these are the targets that the federal government is suggesting to implement. This is currently being reviewed with stakeholders, but they're trying to reach 20% by 2026, 60% of new vehicle sales by 2030, and 100% by 2035. So these are pretty aggressive targets, but we can see that we're sort of at the beginning of that trend upward. And for new technologies, the adoption curve is usually sort of an S shape. So it's very slow at the beginning, and then as the technology develops, as people start buying more and more, you get that rapid expansion until you get to a gradually slowing down point of it. And we've seen this growth in countries such as Norway, for example. Norway is far ahead of Canada. So how is the government trying to support this growth? So as mentioned earlier, Canada has put in place these aggressive targets. They are in line with some of the most optimistic countries out there and states. And on top of those targets and those limits on manufacturers' sales, they've also implemented some incentive programs. So there's the Zero Emission Vehicles program. There's the Zero Emissions Vehicle Infrastructure program. So this program is for installing supply equipment, chargers, refueling stations for hydrogen. And there's finally also the medium and heavy duty zero emissions vehicle program. So those are for semi trucks and the like. We get into this IZEV, so the zero emission vehicle program. So this is a consumer incentive program for your average Canadian, or maybe well-off Canadian in some cases. So it's a monetary incentive for those who are buying zero emission vehicles. So for battery electric, fuel cell electric, and plug-in hybrids with an electric range above 50 kilometers, you can get a $5,000 incentive, and you can get up to $2,500 for shorter range plug-in hybrids. And this is sort of more for the lower cost vehicles. So above $55,000, usually you don't apply. So you'll see a lot of vehicles coming out recently that are trying to meet that price limit. And on top of that, there's also a tax write-off for businesses. So right now, businesses can get 100% tax write-off on zero-emission vehicles, and that will slowly go down. Next year, it'll drop to 75, and then in 2026, it'll drop to 55% write-off. So this here is an animation showing data from the IZEV program. So I'll get it started. So it's basically showing the brands that people are using this IZEV incentive on. So you can see Tesla's at the top, but there's also a lot of legacy car makers that are making vehicles under that $55,000 price point, and people are using the program to buy these cars. So I think one thing to note is that, yes, obviously people see Teslas everywhere. We kind of put Tesla at the top all the time in our heads, but there's a lot out there and people are actually buying. There's a lot of competition. People are actually buying stuff from competitors to Tesla. And On top of the consumer incentive program, there's also the medium and heavy duty ZEV program. So you can see here Paula with a hydrogen truck. This is an incentive program for mostly semi-trucks, but also some construction trucks, so cement trucks, dump trucks. And it's not as large of a program. There's only 550 million. I think the other one was over $1 billion. But the goal is still to eventually help reach 100% of medium and heavy duty vehicles being sold as zero emissions. And the funding is quite large. You can get up to $200,000 per vehicle. And there's a list available on the Government of Canada's website for which vehicles are eligible to receive that funding.
One thing that's going on in Canada is that Canada is looking to essentially dominate or be a leader in the area of EV manufacturing and battery production. As you know, the automotive industry between Canada and US is highly interconnected, and Canada sees an opportunity to become a lead in the EV side or on the battery installation side. So first of all, GM has now Canada's first all-electric vehicle manufacturing facility, and that opened in Ontario recently. The federal government also provided some funding for Stellantis for them to move over to have an EV vehicle manufacturing facility as well, and to convert their existing facilities over. The government of Canada is also aiming to have a complete EV supply chain in Canada, and they've invested funds, for example, in Stellantis for the assembly plants producing EVs. In terms of fleet development, there has been some announcements that have been made with regard to folks that are looking at essentially decarbonizing their fleet. So in the private sector, there has been a federal budget set out to include a 30% tax credit on industrial EVs, 40% tax credit for producing low or zero emission hydrogen. And then Fisheries and Oceans have announced that they were electrifying their fleet. We also, in the last session, we had Canada Post electrifying their fleet. And then we also have funding for municipalities, with the city of Winnipeg ordered 16 new zero-emission buses as part of a plan to electrify the entire fleet. There's also some funding associated with hydrogen buses as well, but we'll not dive into it in this presentation. In terms of research and technology, there is an amazing little lab at the University of Windsor for EV batteries, and this is the Centre for Hybrid Automotive Research and Green Energy Lab. Definitely worth a look. And then Vital Metals, I know the Prime Minister went on a tour recently, and this is in Saskatchewan, and it's Canada's first rare earth metal producer. We have in Canada a significant amount of rare earth metals, and I know that recently there was an announcement of also some funding for vanadium extraction from oil sands, tailings ponds. I think that was Suncor, and that was announced just this week by ERA. So we'll go on to now AMTA. So last week I got the privilege of going to Edmonton for the day for a hydrogen conference, and the AMTA, Trevor from AMTA did present on this new program that they're doing. So apparently in Alberta, there's about 18,000 truckers, and they're looking at new technologies. So they have a pilot that's going on now, just launched last Friday, where it's an 80-week program between Edmonton and Calgary. Suncor has its first hydrogen fueling station, launched last Friday. Heisen truck and also Nikola are two trucks, and essentially you can use the trucks for 2 weeks in order to do long-haul trucking between the two locations, in order to sort of promote adoption and see what this is like. There's nothing better than just trying out the truck. I don't know if you guys have ever tried an EV, but once you've tried it, then some of that anxiety or range concerns, you sort of educate yourself by it's something if somebody else tells you what it's like, but it's very different if you actually try it. So I think it's a really brilliant program that they have launched from AMTA, and pretty cool to drive it, to be able to test drive the vehicle for 2 weeks with your long haul between Edmonton and Calgary.
All right, so we sort of touched on the federal programs. Now let's look at how the provinces are doing. This map shows you which provinces currently have electric vehicle incentives for consumers and which ones do not. You can see I put circles on the ones we can click on. So we'll start with Alberta and Ontario, because although those are red, they do have, well, Ontario at one point had a program. but they've since removed it. And Alberta has a program for chargers, so electric vehicle supply equipment, as it's called. They can provide funding for up to $5,000 for level 2 chargers and up to $7,500 for level 3. So those level 3s are the DC fast chargers. Now let's get into the provinces that do have funding. Of course, as we've seen before, British Columbia and Quebec have had programs for the longest, Quebec since 2012. So you'll see that you can get up to $3,000 for an electric vehicle in BC, up to $7,000 in Quebec, and also funding is available for chargers as well. They also help fund used electric vehicles to get people to get electric vehicles if they can't afford a new one, or if they don't want to if they want to be associated with the emissions of producing a new electric vehicle. Now, if you look at Yukon, Northwest Territories, very similar here. Northwest Territories has a smaller incentive for chargers, but they do still offer $5,000 for electric vehicles. Newfoundland, New Brunswick, PEI, Nova Scotia all have some pretty interesting incentives as well on top of the federal program. And Nova Scotia even funds electric bikes, so you can get up to $500 for electric bikes. This slide here shows you charging stations. This point here is a level 1 charger, and all of the rest are level 2, level 3. So that basically means how fast you can charge. Level 1 being your basic plugging into a wall. Level 3 being extremely fast. Some vehicles can charge up to from 10 to 80% in like 25 minutes or something like that. So you can see that most of the deployed publicly available chargers are level 2, level 3. And level 1 chargers are typically not publicly available. Those are typically just the privately owned ones. I swear, there are some hydrogen stations here that they just don't show up. You need to zoom in quite a bit to see them in BC and Quebec. I think there might be 5 total, if I remember correctly, in Canada. Just to summarize the provincial section, we have some provinces like BC and Quebec that are actively trying to impose sales targets. They're actively trying to impose charging implementation in their provinces. And then we have other provinces that have broad goals, but don't necessarily have enforced strategies to achieve those goals, like New Brunswick and Yukon. So I think most provinces are sort of trying to shift towards the BC and Quebec goals. Federal goals themselves are more aggressive than Quebec. There's overall a shift towards implementation of these strategies. Key takeaways. Last couple of webinars that we presented, we were talking about how the governments are really trying to prioritize EV purchasing, so consumer incentives. Now, the new announcements are showing that the federal government is paying attention to manufacturing, battery manufacturing, vehicle manufacturing, supply, mining, and current market growth that we've seen, the 20%, 60%, and 100% goals are attainable. And overall, seems like a pretty good plan forward.
So as many of you are aware, the US government has come out with the Inflation Reduction Act a couple of years ago, and this act was really about stimulating the economy in the US, as well as focusing on lower carbon emissions intensity, both for vehicles and also for the electricity grid. So this has stimulated a significant investment in the US with regard to infrastructure associated with electric vehicles. So meaning for Canada, this is a positive impact with regard to mining and export opportunities. Unfortunately, on the negative impact is that the incentives are quite lucrative on the US side. So there may be a draw more towards manufacturing on the US side rather than Canada. I know that Canada recently has been trying to catch up. Last week, there was more announcements from President Biden indicating that they were focusing more on build in America. So I think this time is quite important for Canada to demonstrate that we have the capabilities, we have the value chain that we can provide to the US and that the two automotive industries are so finely intertwined that it doesn't make sense to sort of choose the US versus Canada. So keep watching this space. It's evolving very quickly. Keep listening out for the news, but it's definitely a hot topic these days in Canada and US. What is Solas Energy doing with this tool called EV Intelligence? So we've done some modeling for Canada because a lot of the modeling was not available. So we've done provincial modeling on EV deployment under different scenarios, HEVs, PHEVs, different type of vehicles. So is it a pickup truck? Is it a passenger vehicle? And what we found is we couldn't find a database with all of the vehicles that were available in Canada. You could find stuff for the US, but we couldn't find anything for Canada. So we developed one.
We had to identify this need for a database that compiled all the different vehicles available in Canada, the ones that were going to be available in Canada soon, and then all the different information about these vehicles. EVI is this database that has all of that information in one place. So it allows you to compare vehicle to vehicle, specification to specification, and you can get a better idea of what's available out there, what could work for you, for your fleet. It's focusing on battery electric, plug-in hybrid, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, those that are available right now and those that will soon be available that have been announced or that are currently being manufactured. Some of the specs include the battery capacity, the top speed, torque and horsepower, safety ratings, but we have over 30 specifications for those vehicles. So everything in one place. And this year we've also added medium and heavy duty vehicles. So with all those incentives that are available, we thought it'd be important to include that. So we've effectively doubled the size of the list. We're at, I think, 275 models right now. And that's including different trims. So for example, you have the same car, but two different ranges based on the battery capacity. They'll both be included as separate cars in the list. It's all about having a better understanding of what's out there and perhaps helping with fleet decarbonization. These are just some numbers from the database. We can see that through the consumer vehicle side, we have a mean range of 371 kilometers of range. So it's not quite as good as gas yet, but it's pretty close. And that's just the mean, right? So that includes vehicles that are much shorter ranges, and some vehicles are well over that. And for the medium to heavy duty vehicles, the range is a bit shorter, but with the rapid growth in hydrogen fuel cell trucks, we can see a lot higher ranges as well, some above 1,000-kilometer range. Those are the claimed values. See, here's a histogram just showing the ranges. So part of the reason that the mean is a bit lower than the median is because we're counting the electric range of plug-in hybrids. And so some of those are just like 60 kilometers, 43 kilometers. All right, so what you're purchasing with the database, you get access to the full Excel document. You also get a PDF with analysis and summarization of what's going on in the EV industry right now. And you get some time with an analyst to discuss what you want out of the database. All right, and on top of the vehicle database, we also have machinery. So we have a separate document with all of the available machinery. The reason we decided to add that is because we were seeing a lot of growth in this industry. People are investing a lot of money. So Komatsu, Bobcat, Volvo are developing prototypes, or they are working with large companies to develop specific machinery for them. We see that a lot in Europe right now. Electric machinery has a few advantages. There's less noise pollution. They're not as loud, so you can potentially do more work throughout the day. It's easier to be respectful of bylaws. And because electric motors typically don't require as much maintenance, there's potentially less downtime. This database is not as one-to-one as the electric vehicle database, obviously, because there are so many different types of machines available. You can see here I have a huge list, but at least we include specifications for a lot of them. So within each category, you can at least compare. So battery capacity, horsepower, noise, warranty, and stuff like that. With this database, similarly to the EVI database, you get quarterly updates, you get full access to the database, and you can also get some guidance with an analyst.
The database we've heard from people is extremely helpful because it saves a lot of time and searching around to try to find this information, and also to be able to find information on a comparable basis, because it's difficult when you have some information for one vehicle, some information for another, but you're not able to cross compare. So at least this is a holistic, comprehensive review that you can do. We've also found that in the construction side, because we also do construction management work, that a lot of the folks that we work with are quite interested in the construction management, or the construction equipment, I should say, with regard to electrification. And again, they're trying to decarbonize the impact of construction or during the construction period.